Good morning, and welcome back to Storytime Classics Live, produced by Southwest Shakespeare Company. I am your host, Bo Heckman. And today we are going to be continuing with that most epic of stories, The Count of Monte Cristo. Truly, I don't know how they came up with so many people and events for this one story to for everyone to interact with, and it's just one novel, one story. This has what seems to me like something you would see in a Lord of the Rings trilogy or massive novel collection like Dune or something like that. Not just the Lord of the Rings trilogy, but much more. It just seems that epic. All right, I'm going to stop babbling, and if you've missed any of the previous installments, you can go to the Southwest Shakespeare YouTube page and check out all the previous Monte Cristo readings and much more. So check that out if you are not caught up. But for those today who either don't care or who are caught up, Chapter 62 is where we'll be picking up today with ghosts. Wonder what that could mean. In a story like this, just about anything. So let's jump right in there today. Hope everyone's having a great day out there. Chapter 62, Ghosts. At first sight, the exterior of the house at Auteuil gave no indications of splendor. Nothing one would expect from the destined residence of the magnificent Count of Monte Cristo. But this simplicity was according to the will of its master, who positively ordered nothing to be altered outside. The splendor was within. Indeed, almost before the door opened, the scene changed. Monsieur Bertuccio had outdone himself in the taste displayed in furnishing and in the rapidity with which it was executed. It is told that the Duc d'Antin removed in a single night a whole avenue of trees that annoyed Louis the 14th. In 3 days, Monsieur Bertuccio planted an entirely bare court with poplars, large spreading sycamores, to shade the different parts of the house, and in the foreground, instead of the usual paving stones, half hidden by the trees, half hidden by the grass, there extended a lawn, but that morning laid down, and upon which the water was yet glistening. For the rest, the orders had been issued by the Count. He himself had given a plan to Bertuccio, making the spot where each tree was to be planted, and the shape and extent of the lawn which was to take the place of the paving stones. Thus the house had become unrecognizable, and Bertuccio himself declared that he scarcely knew it, encircled as it was by a framework of trees. The overseer would not have objected, while he was about it, to have made some improvements in the garden, but the Count had positively forbidden it to be touched. Bertuccio made amends, however, by loading the antechambers, staircases, and mantelpieces with flowers. What, above all, manifested the shrewdness of the steward and the profound silence of the master, the one in carrying out the ideas of the other, was that this house, which appeared only the night before so sad and gloomy, impregnated with that sickly smell one can almost fancy to be the smell of time, had in a single day acquired the aspect of life, was scented with its master's favorite perfumes, and had the very light regulated according to his wish. When the Count arrived, he had under his touch his books and arms. His eyes rested upon his favorite pictures. His dogs, whose caresses he loved, welcomed him in the antechamber. The birds, whose songs delighted him, cheered him with their music, and the house, awakened from its long sleep, like the sleeping beauty in the wood, lived, sang, and bloomed like the houses we have long cherished, and in which, When we are forced to leave them, we leave a part of our souls. The servants passed gaily along the fine courtyard, some belonging to the kitchens, gliding down the stairs, restored but the previous day, as if they had always inhabited the house. Others filling filling the coach houses, where the equipages, encased and numbered, appeared to have been installed for the last 50 years. And in the stables the horses replied with neighs to the grooms, who spoke to them with much more respect than many servants pay their masters. The library was divided into two parts on either side of the wall, and contained upwards of 2,000 volumes. One division was entirely devoted to novels, and even the volume which had been published but the day before was to be seen in its place in all the dignity of its red and gold binding. On the other side of the house, to match with the library, was the conservatory, ornamented with rare flowers that bloomed in china jars, and in the midst of the greenhouse, marvelous alike to sight and smell, was a billiard table which looked as if it had been abandoned during the past hour by players who had left the balls on the cloth. One chamber alone had been respected by the magnificent Bertuccio. Before this room, to which you could ascend by the grand and go out by the back staircase, the servants passed with curiosity, and Bertuccio with terror. At 5 o'clock precisely, the Count arrived before the house at Auteuil, followed by Ali. Bertuccio was awaiting this arrival with impatience, mingled with uneasiness. He hoped for some compliments, while at the same time he feared to have frowns. Monte Cristo descended into the courtyard, walked all over the house without giving any sign of approbation or pleasure until he entered his bedroom, situated on the opposite side of the closed room. Then he approached a little piece of furniture made of rosewood, which he had noticed at a previous visit. "That can only be to hold gloves," he said. "Will your Excellency deign to open it?" said the delighted Bertuccio, "and you will find gloves in it." Elsewhere the Count found everything he required: smelling bottles, cigars, knickknacks. "Good," he said, and Monsieur Bertuccio left enraptured. So great, so powerful, and real was the influence exercised by his man over all who surrounded him. At precisely 6 o'clock, the clatter of horses' hoofs was heard at the entrance door. It was our captain of Saphis, who had arrived on Media. "I am sure I am the first," cried Morrel. "I did it on purpose to have you a minute to myself. But before everyone came, Julie and Emmanuel have 1,000 things to tell you. Really, this is magnificent. But tell me, Count, will your people take care of my horse? Do not alarm yourself, my dear Maximilian. They understand. I mean, because he wants petting. If you had seen at what a place he came, like the wind." "I should think so. A horse that cost 5,000 francs, said Monte Cristo in the tone which a father would use towards a son. "Do you regret them?" asked Morrel, with his open laugh. "I? Certainly not," replied the Count. "No, I should only regret it if the horse had not proved good. It is so good that I have distanced Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud, one of the best riders in France, and Monsieur de Bray, who both mount the minister's Arabians, and close on their heels are the horses of Madame Danglars, who always go at 6 leagues an hour." "Then they follow you?" asked Monte Cristo. "See, they are here." And at the same minute, a carriage with smoking horses, accompanied by 2 mounted gentlemen, arrived at the gate, which opened before them. The carriage drove round, and stopped at the steps, followed by the horsemen. The instant Debray had touched the ground, he was at the carriage door. He offered his hand to the Baroness, who, descending, took it with a peculiarity of manner imperceptible to everyone but Monte Cristo. But nothing escaped the Count's notice, and he observed a little note passed with the facility that it indicates frequent practice, from the hand of Madame Danglars to that of the minister's secretary. After his wife, the banker, descended, as pale as though he had issued from his tomb instead of his carriage, Madame Danglars threw a rapid and inquiring glance, which could only be interpreted by Monte Cristo, around the courtyard, over the peristyle, and across the front of the house, then representing a slight emotion, which must have been seen on her countenance if she had not kept her color. She ascended the steps, saying to Morrel, "Sir, if you were a friend of mine, I should ask you if you would sell your horse." Morrel smiled with an expression very like a grimace, and then turned round to Monte Cristo, as if to ask him to extricate him from his embarrassment. The Count understood him. "Ah, madame," he said, "why did you not make that request of me?" "With you, sir," replied the Baroness, "one can wish for nothing. One is so sure to obtain it. One can wish for nothing. One is so sure to obtain it." "If it were so with Monsieur Morrel." "Unfortunately," replied the Count, "I am witness that Monsieur Morrel cannot give up his horse, his honor being engaged in keeping it." "How so?" "He laid a wager he would tame Medea in the space of 6 months. You understand now that if he were to get rid of the animal before the time named, he would not only lose his bet, but people would say he was afraid, and a brave captain of Saphis cannot risk this, even to gratify a pretty woman, which is, in my opinion, one of the most sacred obligations in the world." "You see my position, madam," said Morrel, bestowing a grateful smile on Monte Cristo. "It seems to me," said Danglars, in his coarse tone, ill-concealed by a forced smile, "that you have already got horses enough." Madame Danglars seldom allowed remarks of this kind to pass unnoticed, but, to the surprise of the young people, she pretended not to hear it, and said nothing. Monte Cristo smiled at her unusual humility, and showed her 2 immense porcelain jars, over which wound marine plants of a size and delicacy that nature alone could produce. The Baroness was astonished. "Why," said she, "you could plant one of the chestnut trees in the Tuileries inside. How can such enormous jars have been manufactured?" "Ah, madame," replied Monte Cristo, "you must not ask of us, the manufacturers of fine porcelain, such a question. It is the work of another age, constructed by the genii of earth and water." "How so? At what period can that have been?" "I do not know. I have only heard that an emperor of China had an oven built expressly, and that this oven 12 jars like this were successively baked. 2 broke from the heat of the fire. The other 10 were sunk 300 fathoms deep in the sea. The sea, knowing what was required of her, threw over them her weeds, encircled them with coral, and encrusted them with shells. The whole was cemented by 200 years beneath these almost impervious depths. For a revolution carried away the emperor who wished to make the trial, and only left the documents proving the manufacture of the jars and their descent into the sea. At the end of 200 years, the documents were found, and they thought of bringing up the jars. Divers descended in machines, made expressly on the discovery, into the bay where they were thrown. But if 10 only remained, the rest having been broken by the waves. I am fond of these jars, upon which, perhaps, misshapen, frightful monsters have fixed their cold, dull eyes, in which myriads of small fish have slept, seeking a refuge from the pursuit of their enemies. Meanwhile, Danglars, who had cared little for curiosities, was menacingly tearing off the blossoms of a splendid orange tree, one after the other, When he had finished with the orange tree, he began at the cactus, but this, not being so easily plucked as the orange tree, pricked him dreadfully. He shuddered and rubbed his eyes as though waking from a dream. "Sir," said Monte Cristo to him, "I do not recommend my pictures to you, who possess such splendid paintings, but nevertheless, here are two by Hobbema, a Paul Potter, Meyerus, two by Gerard Dow, a Raphael, a Van Dyck, a Zabarin, and 2 or 3 by Murillo, worth looking at." "Stay," said Debray, "I recognize this Hobbema." "Ah, indeed. Yes, it was proposed for the museum, which I believe does not contain one," said Monte Cristo. "No, and yet they refused to buy it." "Why?" said Chateau Renaud. "You pretend not to know, because government was not rich enough." "Ah, pardon me," said Chateau Renaud. "I have heard of these things every day during the last 8 years, and I cannot understand them yet." "You will by and by," said Debray. "I think not," replied Chateau Renaud. "Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti and Count Andrea Cavalcanti announced Baptistin. A black satin stock, fresh from the maker's hands, gray mustaches, a bold eye, a major's uniform, ornamented with 3 medals and 5 crosses. In fact, the thorough bearing of an old soldier, such was the appearance of Major Bartolomeo Cavalcanti, that tender father with whom we are already acquainted. Close to him, dressed in entirely new clothes, advanced smilingly Count Andrea Cavalcanti, the dutiful son whom we also know. The 3 young people were talking together. On the entrance of the newcomers, their eyes glanced from father to son, and then, naturally enough, rested on the latter, whom they began criticizing. "Cavalcanti," said Debray. "A fine name," said Morel. "Yes," said Chateau Renaud, "these Italians are well named and badly dressed." "You are fastidious, Chateau Renaud," replied Debray. "Those clothes are well cut and quite new." "That is just what I find fault with. That gentleman appears to be well dressed for the first time in his life." "Who are those gentlemen?" asked Danglars of Monte Cristo. "You heard. Cavalcanti. That tells me their name and nothing else." "Ah, true. You do not know the Italian nobility. The Cavalcanti are all descended from princes." "Have they any fortune?" "An enormous one." "What do they do?" "Try to spend it all. They have some business with you, I think, from what they told me the day before yesterday. I indeed invited them here today on your account. I will introduce you to them." "But they appear to speak French with a very pure accent," said Danglars. "The son has been educated in a college in the south, I believe near Marseille. You will find him quite enthusiastic." "Upon what subject?" asked Madame Danglars. "The French ladies, madame. He has made up his mind to take a wife from Paris." "A fine idea of his," said Danglars, shrugging his shoulders. Madame Danglars looked at her husband with an expression which, at any other time, would have indicated a storm, but for the second time she controlled herself. "The Baron appears thoughtful today," said Monte Cristo to her. "Are they going to put him in the ministry?" "Not yet, I think. More likely he has been speculating on the bourse and has lost money." "Monsieur and Madame de Villefort," cried Baptistin. They entered. Monsieur de Villefort, notwithstanding his self-control, was visibly affected, and when Monte Cristo touched his hand, he felt it tremble. "Certainly, women alone know how to dissimulate," said Monte Cristo to himself, glancing at Madame Danglars, who was smiling on the procurer and embracing his wife. After a short time, the Count saw Bertuccio, who, until then, had been occupied on the other side of the house, glide into an adjoining room. He went to him. "What do you want, Monsieur Bertuccio?" said he. "Your Excellency has not stated the number of guests." "Ah, true. How many covers?" "Count for yourself." Is everyone here, Your Excellency? Yes. Bertuccio glanced through the door, which was ajar. The Count watched him. Good heavens, he exclaimed. What's the matter? Said the Count. That woman! That woman! Which? The one with a white dress and so many diamonds, the fair one. Madame Danglars? I do not know her name, but it is she, sir, it is she. Whom do you mean? The woman in the garden. She, that was ancienne. She who was walking while she waited for. Bertuccio stood at the open door with his eyes staring and his hair on end. Waiting for whom, Bertuccio? Without answering, waiting for whom? Bertuccio, without answering, pointed to Villefort with something of the gesture Macbeth uses to point out Banquo. Oh, he at length muttered, do you see? What? Who? Him! Him! Monsieur de Villefort, the king's attorney. Certainly I see him. Then I did not kill him? Really, I think you're going mad, good Bertuccio, said the Count. Then he is not dead? No. You see plainly that he is not dead. Instead of striking between the 6th and 7th left ribs, as your countrymen do, you must have struck higher or lower. And life is very tenacious in these lawyers, or rather there is no truth in anything you could have told me. It was a fright of the imagination, a dream of your fancy. You went to sleep full of thoughts of vengeance. They weighed heavily upon your stomach. You had the nightmare. That's all. Come, calm yourself and reckon them up. Monsieur and Madame de Villefort, 2. Monsieur and Madame Danglars, 4. Monsieur de Chateau-Renaud, Monsieur de Bray, Monsieur Morel, 7. Major Bartolomeo Galvagante, 8. 8, replied Bertuccio. Stop. You're in a shocking hurry to be off. You forget one of my guests. Lean a little to the left. Stay. Look at Monsieur Andrea Cavalcanti, the young man in a black coat, looking at Murillo's Madonna. Now he is turning. This time Bertuccio would have uttered an exclamation had not a look from Monte Cristo silenced him. Benedetto? He muttered. Fatality! 6:30 has just struck. Monsieur Bertuccio, said the Count severely, I ordered a dinner at that hour, and I do not like to wait. And he returned to his guests, while Bertuccio, leaning against the wall, succeeded in reaching the dining room. 5 minutes afterwards, the doors of the drawing room were thrown open, and Bertuccio, appearing, said, with a violent effort, the dinner awaits. The Count of Monte Cristo offered his arm to Madame de Villefort. Madame de Villefort, he said, will you conduct the Baroness Danglars? Villefort complied, and they passed on to the dining room. Chapter 63. The Dinner. It was evident that one sentiment affected all the guests on entering the dining room. Each one asked what strange influence had brought them to this house, and yet astonished, even uneasy though they were, they still felt that they would not like to be absent. The recent events, the solitary and eccentric position of the Count, his enormous, nay, almost incredible fortune, should have made men cautious, and have altogether prevented ladies visiting the house, where there was no one of their own sex to receive them. And yet curiosity had been enough to lead them to overlap the bounds of prudence and decorum. And all present, even including Cavalcanti and his son, notwithstanding the stiffness of the one and the carelessness of the other, were thoughtful in finding themselves assembled at the house of this incomprehensible man. Madame Danglars had started when Villefort, on the Count's invitation, offered his arm, and Villefort felt that his glance was uneasy beneath his gold spectacles when he felt the arm of the Baroness pressed upon his own. None of this had escaped the Count, and even by this mere contact of individuals, the scene had already acquired considerable interest for an observer. Monsieur de Villefort had on the right hand Madame Danglars, on his left Morrel. The Count was seated between Madame de Villefort and Danglars. The other seats were filled by Debray, who was placed between the two Cavalcanti, and by Chateau Renaud, seated between Madame de Villefort and Morrel. The repast was magnificent. Monte Cristo had endeavored completely to overturn the Parisian ideas, and to feed the curiosity as much as the appetite of his guests. It was an oriental feast that he offered to them, but of such a kind as the Arabian fairies might be supposed to prepare. Every delicious fruit that the four quarters of the globe could provide was heaped in vases from China and jars from Japan. Rare birds retaining their most brilliant plumage, enormous fish spread upon massive silver dishes, together with every wine produced in the archipelago. Asia Minor, or the Cape, sparkling in bottles whose grotesque shape seemed to give an additional flavor to the draught. All these, like one of the displays with which Apicius of old gratified his guests, passed in review before the eyes of the astonished Parisians, who understood that it was possible to expend 1,000 louis upon a dinner for 10 persons, but only on the condition of eating pearls like Cleopatra, or drinking refined gold like Lorenzo de Medici. Monte Cristo noticed the general astonishment, and began laughing and joking about it. "Gentlemen," he said, "you will admit that, when arrived at a certain degree of fortune, the superfluities of life are all that can be desired, and the ladies will allow that after having risen to a certain eminence of position, the ideal alone can be more exalted. Now, to follow out this reasoning, what is the marvelous, that which we do not understand? What is that we really desire, that which we cannot obtain? Now, to see things which I cannot understand, to procure impossibilities, these are the study of my life. I gratify my wishes by two means: my will and my money. I take as much to interest in the pursuit of some whim as you do, Monsieur Danglars, in promoting a new railway line; you, Monsieur de Villefort, in condemning a culprit to death; you, Monsieur Debray, in pacifying a kingdom; you, Monsieur de Château-Renaud, in pleasing a woman; and you, Morrel, in breaking a horse that no one can ride. For example, you see, these two fish. One bought 50 leagues beyond St. Petersburg, and the other 5 leagues from Naples. It is not amusing to see them both on the same table." "What are the two fish?" asked Danglars. "Monsieur Château-Renaud, who has lived in Russia, will tell you the name of one, and Major Cavalcanti, who is an Italian, will tell you the name of the other. The one is, I think, a sterlet," said Château-Renaud, "and that one, if I mistake not, a lamprey." "Just so. Now, Mr. Danglars, ask these gentlemen where they are caught." "Starlets," said Château-Renaud, "are only found in Volga." "And," said Cavalcanti, "I know that Lake Fusaro alone supplies lampreys of that size." "Exactly. One comes from the Volga, and the other from Lake Fusaro." "Impossible!" cried all the guests simultaneously. "Well, this is just what amuses me," said Monte Cristo. "I am like Nero. Cupitor, impossibilum. And that is what is amusing you at the moment. This fish, which seems so exquisite to you, is very likely no better than perch or salmon, but it seemed impossible to procure it, and here it is." "But how could you have these fish brought to France?" "Oh, nothing more easy. Each fish was brought over in a cask, one filled with river herbs and weeds, the other with rushes and lake plants. They were placed in a wagon built on purpose, and thus the sterlet lived 12 days, the lamprey 8, and both were alive when my cook seized them, killing one with milk and the other with wine." You do not believe me, Monsieur Danglars? I cannot help doubting, answered Danglars with his stupid smile. Baptistin, said the Count, have the other fish brought in, the sterlet and the lamprey which came in the other casks, and which are yet alive. Danglars opened his bewildered eyes. The company clapped their hands. 4 servants carried in 2 casks covered with aquatic plants, and in each of which was breathing a fish similar to those on the table. But why have 2 of each sort? Asked Danglars. Merely because one might have died, carelessly answered Monte Cristo. You are certainly an extraordinary man, said Danglars, and philosophers may well say it is a fine thing to be rich. And to have ideas, added Madame Danglars. Oh, do not give me credit for this, madame. It was done by the Romans, who much esteemed them, and Pliny relates that they sent slaves from Ostia to Rome, who carried on their heads fish which he calls the molus, and which, from the description, must probably be the goldfish. It was also considered a luxury to have them alive, it being an amusing sight to see them die, for which, when dying, they change color 3 or 4 times, and, like the rainbow when it disappears, pass through all the prismatic shades. After which, they were sent to the kitchen. Their agony formed part of their merit. If they were not seen alive, they were despised when dead. Yes, said Debray, but then Ostia is only a few leagues from Rome. True, said Monte Cristo. But what would be the use of living 1800 years after Lucilius, if we can do no better than he could? The 2 Cavalcanti opened their enormous eyes, but had the good sense not to say anything. All this is very extraordinary, said Chateau Renaud. Still, what I admire the most, I confess, is the marvelous promptitude with which your orders are executed. Is it not true that you only bought this house 5 or 6 days ago? Certainly not longer. Well, I am sure it is quite transformed since last week. If I remember rightly, it had another entrance, and the courtyard was paved and empty, while today we have a splendid lawn, bordered by trees which appear to be 100 years old. Why not? I am fond of grass and shade, said Monte Cristo. Yes, said Madame de Villefort. The door was towards the road before, and on the day of my miraculous escape, you brought me into the house from the road, I remember. Yes, madame, said Monte Cristo, but I preferred having an entrance which would allow me to see the Bois de Boulogne over my gate. In 4 days, said Morrel, it is extraordinary. Indeed, said Chateau Renaud, it seems quite miraculous to make a new house out of an old one, for it was very old and dull too. I recollect coming for my mother to look at it when Monsieur de Saint-Méran advised it for sale 2 or 3 years ago. Monsieur de Saint-Méran, said Madame de Villefort. Then this house belonged to Monsieur de Saint-Méran before you bought it? It appears so, replied Monte Cristo. Is it possible you do not know of whom you purchased it? Quite so. My steward transacts all this business for me. It is certainly 10 years since the house has been occupied, said Chateau Renaud, and it was quite melancholy to look at it, the blinds closed, the doors locked, and the weeds in the court. Really, if the house had not belonged to the father-in-law of the procurer, one might have thought it some accursed place where a horrible crime had been committed. Villefort, who had hitherto not tasted the 3 or 4 glasses of rare wine which were placed before them, here took one, and drank it off. Monte Cristo allowed a short time to elapse, and then said, "It is singular, Baron, but the same idea came across me the first time I came here. It looks so gloomy, I should never have bought it if my steward had not taken the matter into his own hands. Perhaps the fellow had been bribed by the notary." "It is probable," stammered out Villefort, trying to smile, "but I can assure you that I had nothing to do with any such proceeding. This house is part of Valentine's marriage portion, and Monsieur de Saint-Méran wished to sell it, for if it had remained another year or 2 uninhabited, it would have fallen to ruin." It was Morrel's turn to become pale. "There was, above all, one room, counted Monte Cristo, very plain in appearance, hung with red damask, which, I know not why, appeared to me quite dramatic. Why so? Said Danglars. Why dramatic? Can we account for instinct? Said Monte Cristo. Are there not some places where we seem to breathe sadness? Why, we cannot tell. It is a chain of recollections, an idea which carries you back to other times, to other places, which, very likely, have no connection with the present time and place. And there is something in this room which reminds me forcibly of the chamber of the Marquis de Ganges, or Desdemona. Stay, since we have finished dinner. I will show it to you, when we will take coffee in the garden. After dinner, the play. Monte Cristo looked inquiringly at his guests. Madame de Villefort rose. Monte Cristo did the same, and the rest followed their example. Villefort and Madame Danglars remained for a moment, as if rooted to their seats. They questioned each other with vague and stupid glances. Did you hear? Said Madame Danglars. We must go, replied Villefort, offering his arm. The others, attracted by curiosity, we are already scattered in different parts of the house, for they thought the visit would not be limited to the one room, and that at the same time they would obtain a view of the rest of the building, of which Monte Cristo had created a palace. Each one went out by the open doors. Monte Cristo waited for the two who remained. Then, when they had passed, he brought up the rear, and on his face was a smile which, if they could have understood it, would have alarmed them much more than a visit to the room they were about to enter. They began by walking through the apartments, many of which were fitted up in the Eastern style, with cushions and divans instead of beds, and pipes instead of furniture. The drawing rooms were decorated in the rarest pictures by the old masters. The boudoirs hung with draperies from China, of fanciful colors, fantastic design, and wonderful texture. At length, they arrived at the famous room. There was nothing particular about it, except that, although daylight had disappeared, it was not lighted, and everything in it was old-fashioned, while the rest of the rooms had been redecorated. These two causes were enough to give it a gloomy aspect. Oh, cried Madame de Villefort, it is really frightful. Madame Danglars tried to utter a few words, but was not heard. Many observations were made, the import of which was a unanimous opinion that there was something sinister about the room. Is it not so? Asked Monte Cristo. Look at that large, clumsy bed, hung with such gloomy, blood-colored drapery, and those two crayon portraits that have faded from the dampness. Do they not seem to say, with their pale lips and staring eyes, "We have seen"? Villefort became livid. Madame Danglars fell into a long seat placed near the chimney. "Oh," said Madame de Villefort, smiling, "are you courageous enough to sit down upon a very seat, perhaps, upon which the crime was committed?" Madame Danglars rose suddenly. "And then," said Monte Cristo, "that is not all." "What is there more?" said Debray, who had not failed to notice the allegation of Madame Danglars. "Ah, what else is there?" said Danglars, "for at present I cannot say that I have seen anything extraordinary. What do you say, Monsieur Cavalcanti?" "Ah," said he, "we have at Pisa Ugolino's tower, at Ferrara Tasso's prison, at Rimini the room of Francesca and Paolo." "Yes, but you have not this little staircase," said Monte Cristo, opening a door concealed by the drapery. "Look at it and tell me what you think of it." "What? A wicked-looking, crooked staircase," said Chateau Renaud with a smile. "I did not know whether the wine of Chios produces melancholy, but certainly everything appears to me black in this house," said Debray. Ever since Valentine's dowry had been mentioned, Morrel had been silent and sad. Can you imagine, said Monte Cristo, some Othello or Abbe de Ganges, one stormy, dark night, descending these stairs step by step, carrying a load which he wishes to hide from the sight of man, if not from God? Madame Danglars half fainted on the arm of Villefort, who was obliged to support himself against the wall. "Ah, madame," cried Debray, "what is the matter with you? How pale you look!" "It is very evident what is the matter with her," said Madame de Villefort. "Monsieur de Monte Cristo is relating horrible stories to us, doubtless intending to frighten us to death." "Yes," said Villefort. "Really, Count, you frightened the ladies." "What is the matter?" asked Debray, in a whisper of Madame Danglars. "Nothing," she replied in a violent effort. "I want air. That is all." "Will you come into the garden?" said Debray, advancing towards the black staircase. "No," she answered. "I would rather remain here." "Are you really frightened, madame?" said Monte Cristo. "Oh, no, sir," said Madame Danglars, "but you suppose scenes in a manner which gives them the appearance of reality." "Ah, yes," said Monte Cristo, smiling. "It is all a matter of imagination. Why should we not imagine this the apartment of an honest mother, and this bed, with red hangings, a bed visited by the goddess Lucina, and that mysterious staircase, the passage through which, not to disturb their sleep, the doctor and nurse pass, or even the father carrying the sleeping child?" Here Madame Danglars insisted of being calmed by the soft picture, uttered a groan, and fainted. "Madame Danglars is ill," said Villefort. "It would be better to take her to her carriage." "Oh, mon Dieu," said Monte Cristo, "and I have forgotten my smelling bottle." "I have mine," said Madame de Villefort, and she passed over to Monte Cristo a bottle full of the same kind of red liquid whose good properties the Count had tested on Edward. "Ah," said Monte Cristo, taking it from her hand. "Yes," she said, "at your advice I have made the trial." "And have you succeeded?" "I think so." Madame Danglars was carried into the adjoining room. Monte Cristo dropped a very small portion of the red liquid upon her lips. She returned to consciousness. "Ah," she cried, "what a frightful dream!" Villefort pressed her hand to let her know it was not a dream. They looked for Monsieur Danglars, but, as he was not especially interested in poetical ideas, he had gone into the garden, and was talking with Major Cavalcanti on the projected railway from Leghorn to Florence. Monte Cristo seemed in despair. He took the arm of Madame Danglars and conducted her into the garden, where they found Danglars taking coffee between the Cavalcanti. "Really, madam," he said, "did I alarm you much?" "Oh, no, sir," she answered, "but you know, things impress us differently, according to the mood of our minds." Villefort forced a laugh. "And then, no," he said, "an idea, a supposition is sufficient." "Well," said Monte Cristo, "you may believe me if you like, but it is my opinion that a crime has been committed in this house." "Take care," said Madame de Villefort. "The king's attorney is here." "Ah," replied Monte Cristo, "since that is the case, I will take advantage of his presence to make my declaration." "Your declaration?" said Villefort. "Yes, before witnesses." "Oh, this is very interesting," said Debray. "If there really has been a crime, we will investigate it." "There has been a crime," said Monte Cristo. "Come this way, gentlemen. Come, Monsieur de Villefort, for a declaration to be available should be made before the competent authorities." He then took Villefort's arm, and at the same time holding that of Madame Danglars under his own, he dragged the procurer from the plantain tree, where the shade was the thickest. All the other guests followed. "Stay," said Monte Cristo, "here in this very spot," and he stamped upon the ground. "I had the earth dug up and fresh mold put in, to refresh these old trees. Well, my man, digging, found a box, or rather the ironwork of a box, in the midst of which was the skeleton of a newly born infant." Monte Cristo felt the arm of Madame Danglars stiffen, while that of Villefort trembled. "A newly born infant," repeated Debray. "This affair becomes serious." "Well," said Chateau Renaud, I was not wrong just now, then, when I said that houses had souls and faces like men, and that their exteriors carried the impress of their characters. This house was gloomy because it was remorseful. It was remorseful because it concealed a crime. Who said it was a crime? Asked Villefort, with a last effort. How is it not a crime to bury a living child in a garden? Cried Monte Cristo. And pray, what do you call such an action? But who said it was buried alive? Why bury it there if it were dead? This garden has never been a cemetery. What is done to infanticides in this country? Asked Major Cavalcanti innocently. Oh, their heads are soon cut off, said Danglars. Ah, indeed, said Cavalcanti. I think so. Am I not right, Monsieur de Villefort? Asked Monte Cristo. Yes, Count, replied Villefort in a voice now scarcely human. Monte Cristo, seeing that the two persons for whom he had prepared this scene could scarcely endure it, and not wishing to carry it too far, he said, Come, gentlemen, some coffee. We seem to have forgotten it. And he conducted the guests back to the table on the lawn. Indeed, Count, said Madame Danglars, I am ashamed to own it, but all your frightful stories have so upset me that I must beg you to let me sit down. And she fell into a chair. Monte Cristo bowed and went to Madame de Villefort. I think Madame Danglars again requires your bottle, he said, but before Madame de Villefort could reach her friend, the procureur had found time to whisper to Madame Danglars, I must speak to you. When? Tomorrow. Where? My office, or in the court, if you like. That is the surest place. I will be there. At this moment, Madame de Villefort approached. Thanks, my dear friend, said Madame Danglars, trying to smile. It is over now, and I am much better. And we will stop here today and resume next time, which will be next Tuesday, at chapter 64, entitled The Beggar. Thank you, as always, for tuning in to Storytime Classics Live. And stay tuned for us for more of the Count of Monte Cristo coming up next week. Hope you have a great day. We'll see you next time.